on this episode of Skeptiko.
We can all sit around and congratulate each other and say how smart we are because we figured this out and everyone else seems to be dancing in the dark. But I'd rather look at what's going to change now. What about Sam Parnia's research? What about the other research that's going on in near-death experience? How are things going to change? I see Sam Parnia's research being the threat of near-death experience research being co-opted by mainstream science. He's not looking to bust any paradigms. He's looking to co-opt it and jam it back into materialism in some way.
The whole thing is not just near-death experience science. It is the whole area of consciousness science. It's the whole picture of children who remember past lives, the near-death experience, mediumship, where we talk to people on the other side. It's all of these things that tend to say the same thing, that consciousness exists outside the body.
Stay with us for Skeptiko.
Welcome to Skeptiko, where we explore controversial science with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Tsakiris, and on this episode, we talk about near-death experience science, and in particular, the upcoming International Association for Near-Death Experience Studies that's coming up in September. And we have with us Dr. Alan Hugenot, who is a board member with IANDS, here to talk about this. Now, originally I was just going to do a promo for the conference because I think it's a very valuable group that I like to support and promote, and I think their conference is certainly going to be great. They have some terrific speakers there, and if interested in it, I'm sure you'd enjoy visiting San Antonio and going to this. But in talking to Alan, I was a little bit surprised, I guess, at my frustration with near-death experience science research and the potential problems of where it's heading. I can't help but feel that there's a lot of parallels between parapsychology and near-death experience science, in that when you try and get a little bit too cozy with mainstream science or try and accommodate and fit into the existing status quo, you run the risk of losing your way. And I'm not sure that that's happening with near-death experience research, but it's something that I felt like hashing out with our guest today, Dr. Alan Hugenot. This dialogue might be a little bit of inside baseball if you're not into near-death experience science and the research, but it's a topic I care about, so I did enjoy the chance to chat a little bit about it. I hope you enjoy my dialogue with Dr. Alan Hugenot. Today we welcome Alan Hugenot to Skeptiko. Dr. Hugenot is a nationally recognized expert in physics and engineering sciences, for which he holds a PhD and has many honors. But more importantly to us, Alan is someone who had a near-death experience some 40 years ago, and that experience has sent him on a lifelong mission to explore consciousness, extended human consciousness, and this phenomena of near-death experience. Alan is a board member of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, and we're hoping he'll tell us a little bit more about what's going on at IANDS, including their upcoming conference later this year. He's also an active member of the Institute for Noetic Sciences, IANDS. Of course, we all know Dean Radin, and Alan has actually collaborated with Dr. Radin on some of the work he's doing. So we'll certainly want to talk about that as well. Alan, it's a great pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining me on Skeptiko.
I'm glad to be here, Alex. It's an opportunity to get the word out to a few people about what's really going on in science.
Okay, well, let's start with what the word is really going on at IANDS, since one of the reasons we want to have you on is because IANDS has a national conference, actually an international conference every year. This year it's going to be held in San Antonio, and we certainly want to let people know the who, what, why, and some of the reasons why they might want to consider checking that out. So can you tell folks a little bit about the IANDS conference?
Yeah, the conference will be in San Antonio, and it's the 3rd through the 6th of September. And we're going to have some very excellent speakers there this year. It's quite a program. We have four key featured speakers that are Even Alexander. Most people know who he is. He wrote the book Proof of Heaven. And then there's Suzanne Geisman. She's a medium who used to be, she's Commander Geisman, used to be aide-de-camp to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She's got quite a background, and she's a medium. She in 9/11 happened, she was in the air on Air Force One flying to London so that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff could be knighted by the Queen Elizabeth, and they had to turn around and fly home because all the jets had crashed into the trade towers and everything. She's got quite a background, and she's quite a speaker. She's going to be there. We've got Anita Marjani there, and it's really going to be a very good conference for those who are interested in the near-death experience. It's also a very scientific conference. The first day of the conference on Thursday will be all about research. It's a very scientific day, and then they get into the more metaphysical things on the weekend. And so it makes a really great conference. We changed it just a little bit in that way so that all of the more, academic, if you want to use that word, things are on one day, and all of the not so academic things are on another day.
Well, that's great. And, one of the things that I thought we might take the opportunity to talk a little bit about today, in addition to letting people know that the conference is upcoming and that we'll, of course, have a link in the show notes to this show, is, we had a little bit of an email exchange, and I said, hey, we can just talk about the conference, or we can talk more about kind of the state of near-death experience science and near-death experience research. And you seem very willing to do that, which is great, because on this show we've talked to so many near-death experience researchers, but we've also tried to figure out the bigger picture of what's going on with near-death experience science, how it's relating to science in general, what kind of changes we might expect to see. So there's just a whole bunch of issues that I thought we might throw on the table. And particularly since you are an IANDS board member, I thought it'd be kind of neat to talk about the state of near-death experience science, since you guys do publish many scholarly papers on that and you're up to date on the research. So maybe we can jump into that.
Yeah, let's jump in there. It's fine with me. That's what I do, is I actually lecture on the science of the afterlife.
Well, great. Then, where I thought we'd start, because probably the biggest news item, I think, for most people in the last year regarding near-death experience science would be finally the eventual publication of the AWARE study led by Dr. Sam Parnia, formerly of Cornell. Now I think he's at University of New York, Stony Brook. But I think Sam Parnia is such an interesting figure within the near-death experience community, and he kind of embodies both the promise and the threat of near-death experience science. So I sent you this quote, and I thought this would be a great launching off point, because again, it kind of encapsulates, I guess, more my frustration with Dr. Parnia than anything else, but at least he is out there leading the charge with near-death experience science. But he was quoted in this article talking about the AWARE study, which is this comprehensive multi-year study of near-death experiences that he conducted in emergency rooms, in cardiac arrest wards, where they put this computer that was displaying images up above the patient with the idea that the patient might have an out-of-body experience during their near-death experience and might be able to look at the computer screen and then report back to us what they saw. And that would be some kind of conclusive proof that what these NDEers are saying is really true. We did a couple of shows on that, including an interview with Dr. Parnia. I thought it was really a misguided research project and a doomed to fail project. He did get kind of a no result from it. But here's the quote after all that he wound up with that I found. I'll just throw it out there before I offer any more opinions. But this is from a piece he did in the BBC. He was quoting the BBC, and he said, if the father of a child from the Midwest says, when you die, you'll see Jesus and he'll be full of love and compassion, then, of course, he'll see that. So,
and that's quite a quote, yeah. A couple of things that I want to say is, one, the experiment was sort of doomed to failure because it's very difficult to create any experiments that can be set up in advance for a near-death experience. And I have to congratulate him on trying, to have something that they could observe up if they were above the operating table and observing something maybe on the top of the lamp in the ceiling somewhere. It's really hard to come up with a good experiment. Everybody's always saying, so how are you going to prove your theory? You have to make it falsifiable, and that's what we're trying to do. So I forgive him for that. But go ahead with this question. The child would see that. We sort of see, apparently, from all my study, and I've been studying this for 40 years. I study all the metaphysics as well as all the science on it. And from all of the reporting back, which some of it's questionable and some of it's seems very positive, it seems that what you think you're going to see is what you're going to see. It's like quantum electrodynamics. What you see is what you get. I call it the observer principle. We precipitate the reality we're looking for. And it seems to be the same way in the afterlife. So that's what he's saying there.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, I think there's plenty of cases where people don't see what they expect to see. But in a larger sense, I think the problem with it is twofold. I mean, first, I don't quite agree with that we need to give Dr. Parney credit on this. I think just the opposite. I think we have to kind of pull the lens back a little bit and say, what are you actually doing here? What is the presupposition that's made with this research? I mean, the idea that we would put a computer screen up above the operating room because the person is going to float outside of their body. I mean,
well, I don't think it's a computer screen. What we were doing in the AWARE study was putting a series of strange numbers or other objects that just shouldn't be up there.
No, he put a computer screen up there. I mean,
he didn't. He did this in quite a few cardiac arrest areas around the country, and he may have had a computer readout up there. But what he was supposed to do is put objects that they would say this shouldn't be up there.
Well, he did both. And he started with one and he did other. But the point, the point is the same. It's that all we can ever say about near-death experience, in my opinion, is that it defies the materialistic, reductionistic idea that your mind is a product of your brain. Everything Absolutely. Beyond, I mean, that is the fundamental shift. So when we start doing these dorky little, do you see the number over on the wall? I mean, one, how many people have an out-of-body experience? When they have an out-of-body experience?
Okay. One-fifth of cardiac arrest people have a near-death experience. And out of those, maybe one-third will have an experience where they felt they were in the top of the room. So we're down to a very small number. But to design an experiment is very difficult. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into experiment design. I just want to say it's very difficult to design experiments that can bring results that prove things. I work extensively with the Noetic Society doing mediumship, and it's very difficult to design experiments that can prove something.
Well, I mean,
it takes a lot of work.
Of course. And science, of course, isn't in the game of proving things.
It is the situation that you're talking about of it's either the brain creates consciousness or consciousness created the brain. Okay, that's the question. Materialism says the brain evolved, and out of unconscious matter, we evolved the human being with the brain that thinks and is conscious. Okay, does that make any sense? Out of unconscious, you evolve consciousness. Let's look at it the other way around. Let's suppose that we have consciousness and it evolves the whole universe. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? How does consciousness arise out of an unconscious chemicals coming together and forming human beings and that think and are conscious? It sure looks like it's following a pattern, doesn't it, that we are evolving upwards. So what's creating that pattern? The materialist as well. It's just the laws of physics. Yes, who enforces those laws of physics? What enforces those laws of physics? And I'm not speaking for a God, but I am speaking for a plan. There is some consciousness in the universe. And I'm going to give you a quote that came out yesterday. This is a quote by Gideon Lickfield, who's the senior editor for Atlantic's Global News, and used to be global news editor for Atlantic's Quartz magazine. And here's what he said yesterday, and this is online. You can look it up. I'm going to quote. It's about me. It's in the middle of a long feature article. Alan Hugenot lectures on the leading-edge science of the afterlife, and he concluded that the entire universe is conscious, and that this explains both near-death experiences and certain paradoxes of quantum theory. As someone with a physics degree, I know that Hugenot's basic idea of conscious universe is neither crazy nor new. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the fathers of quantum physics, was an avid student of Hindu philosophy and believed something similar. And that's the end of his quote. His article yesterday was all about our last convention that the International Association for Near-Death Studies had, and he interviewed quite a few of us during that article. But that's what he said. This is not a new idea. This is the same idea that the people who gave us quantum physics had, that consciousness precedes the brain, not the other way around. It's if you go back and look at the premises which underlie materialism, they're all assumptions or presumptions that were made back in the 17th and 18th centuries. And those are reality, locality, causality, continuity, and determinism. All of those concepts were assumed to be self-evident, and all of them have been disproved by quantum theory. The last one to fall was locality, and John Bell's theory of non-locality, which has been proven now, I think, 11 times in 11 different experiments throughout the world. We've shown that there is no space. That space is an illusion. You're sitting in space, you feel the room around you, that's an illusion. Quantum physics proves this. And anyone who says, well, I want to believe materialism and I want to believe quantum physics, okay, then get rid of your cell phone and anything with a transistor in it. Get rid of your MRIs, get rid of all those things, because quantum electrodynamics is the theory which allows those things. It's the most proven theory in all of science.
Yeah, but Alan, hold on. We've been down. I mean, I have 150 shows that say exactly the same thing. The fact of the matter is, we're in this place that we are with science marching on and not accepting this model that you're talking about, not as they have for the last at least 80 years, if not 100 years. So I think what we need to do is hone in on, what's going to change. We can all sit around and congratulate each other and say how smart we are because we figured this out and everyone else seems to be dancing in the dark. But I'd rather look at what's going to change now. What about Sam Parnia's research? What about the other research that's going on in near-death experience? How are things going to change? And I see Sam Parnia's research being the threat of near-death experience research being co-opted by mainstream science. If you really look at what Sam Parnia is saying, and he has a lot of doublespeak in what he's saying, but when I interviewed him a couple years ago, his conclusion was that if he was going to be pushed, he would suspect that near-death experiences are, and this is a quote, a trick of the mind. In other words, mind equals brain. Materialism, reductionism still holds. There's just some kind of feature of it that we have to find that does near-death experience science. I think he's still trying to jam the near-death experience back into traditional science, back into his resuscitation model, which he's very good at. He's a recognized worldwide leader in resuscitation, but he's not looking to bust any paradigms. He's looking to co-opt it and jam it back into materialism in some way. And so are many other cutting-edge researchers. The people who always get pushed. And another guy who's been on the show, recognized leader, researcher in consciousness, is Christoph Koch from Caltech, and there's a guy who seems to be kind of dabbling with the idea that it can be more, but he only holds that out, and then he pulls people back. No, don't worry. It might be down at the quantum level, but eventually we'll find a way to explain it in materialistic terms. That's, I think, the threat that near-death experience science is facing.
Well, it's all, the whole thing, and this is what I say in my book, The Death Experience. The whole thing is not just near-death experience science. It is the whole area of consciousness science, consciousness outside of the body. And that's what goes on with the Consciousness Research Laboratory at the Noetic Society, where I work with Dean Radin and Dr. Arnold DeLorme. And DeLorme's the one that made the EEG system with 32 connections on the head of whoever he's looking at. He created the program everybody's using throughout the world. And he is researching mediumship, because mediumship occurs outside of the consciousness of the medium. And they've shown with their 2012 study that when a medium is doing mediumship, they're doing something totally different than they are when they're doing creative, imaginative things. And that's a whole study you need to read. People have to read it to actually get it. But what they're saying is, if you're imagining and thinking and creative, you have alpha and theta waves in your head. And when mediums are doing their work, they only have gamma waves in their head. And the gamma waves are muscle movements. They're eyes, ears, and feelings. And they're receiving. And he can show how they're receiving from outside their body something. And we pretty much established that. And this is consciousness research. So it's not just the near-death experience. It's the whole picture of children who remember past lives. The near-death experience, mediumship, where we talk to people on the other side. It's all of these things that tend to say the same thing, that consciousness exists outside the body. And all these areas of science are coming together and collating with each other and creating replication, not the kind of replication that a materialist will think about. They want somebody who's a total skeptic to get the same result as the person who wasn't a skeptic. And we know from quantum physics that doesn't work, from the observer principle. And we've known this for 80 years. They refuse to accept that quantum level of thinking. And here's the problem. They're always trying to push it back into the materialist viewpoint. But the materialist viewpoint is based on those same things: causality, determinism, locality, continuity. All those things have been disproved by quantum physics. They're not true. The best one that we have, again, is non-locality. It proves there is no space. Now, Einstein had trouble with that. He was okay with him if there was no time in relativity.
Right.
Time.
And we all know that.
To first principles. He was a great classical physicist, and all he said was, it doesn't seem right to have no space.
I love talking about Schrödinger and Einstein and Niels Bohr and all the rest of them, and it's awesome. But it's a history of exactly where we are now, of just kind of treading water and telling everyone how dumb they are and how quantum physics has already proven all this. And meanwhile, the band keeps playing the same old song. So, hey, I think IANDS is doing awesome work. I think Dean Radin's work with the double slit experiment is phenomenally impressive, and it really gets to the heart of your point about how quantum physics has known this for 80 years, and yet they've choose to do the shut up and calculate thing and totally bypass it. And Radin has gone in and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, you want more proof? I'll prove it to you right here. But I don't like skipping past, so we were talking about near-death experience science. And then we say, well, you don't like our near-death experience science. That's okay. We'll roll this out and we'll show something else. Hey, this is what I do all the time, Alan. I talk about this stuff all the time. So I can see the advantages of saying it's consciousness in general, it's non-locality. I think all that stuff is true. I think it's proven in a number of different ways. Hell, the placebo and nocebo effect proves it. Hypnosis proves it. Self-directed neuroplasticity proves it. We've proven it all over the place. But the challenge is you're a board member of IANDS. So what is near-death experience doing to advance the ball? And if we can't call out people like Sam Parnia and critically analyze his work and say whether that kind of, because it's the cutting edge, it's what's gotten some funding. If we can't say whether that's going to move us forward or not, then I think we're not making progress. And that brings me to the second part of that Sam Parnia quote that I find really troubling, is that when you die, you'll see Jesus and be full of love and compassion. Well, if your Father tells you that, then you'll see Jesus. Hey, this is really the question. So he doesn't want to go on that third rail, and he now wants to talk about putting down Jesus and, what people might see in that spiritual realm. We are not in a position to do that. We'd love to placate the atheist scientific community, but really, if we're going to be honest, what the near-death experience science tells us is all that stuff is on the table. That we do have to find a way to kind of wrangle in the idea that people do see Jesus or Christ consciousness. They see Buddha. They see Krishna. They see spirit beings. I mean, that's part of the experience. So we can bifurcate that and say, okay, did you leave your body and were you able to see that? But once we incorporate that in, we have to go there, don't we? We can't sidestep this with this, kind of placating the atheists and with the Jesus thing.
Well, here's what I have to say. When I had my near-death experience, I went and I arrived with a being of light, and I wrote it down as soon as I came back. The being of light did not identify he or she or itself as being male, female, or otherwise. It was definitely a personal being. Did not identify itself as Krishna, Buddha, Christ, Jesus, Allah Akbar, whatever. None of that. Didn't identify itself as being any of that. And a very interesting discussion I had with a gentleman who he likes to, Fakir is his name, that's the name he's chosen to have. And Fakir, he tortured himself using the Ogallala Sioux, the Lakota Sioux vision quest system of hanging himself by his muscles from a tree, with spikes in his chest. He did all those things because that made sense to him. And he passed over to the other side, literally had a near-death experience by scaring himself out of his body through too much pain. And he met up with the light. And the light, he said, "Who are you?" And the light says, "Well, who do you want me to be?" And that was his experience. And so taking his experience and my experience, the light doesn't identify itself. What Sam's really saying there is, if you think it's Jesus, it's Jesus. If you think it's Buddha, it's Buddha. Whatever you think, that's what the light is. But the truth is, the light is just a being of light.
The truth is, we don't know, Alan. The truth is, we can't say that. We can't dismiss people.
The truth is, I can say what I saw.
But it just isn't good science to generalize that and say, therefore, the being of light is whoever we want it to be. There are people that have reported, it's been very public, seeing Jesus, feeling Jesus's wounds, having that being tell them they are Jesus. I interviewed Pastor Howard Storm, well-known near-death experiencer, very open guy, but very overtly Christian in terms of his understanding of the experience. Are we going to go and tell those people that that's somehow not true and that your experience is more authentic because it was kind of this generalized experience?
Here's what I want to say to that, okay? I don't want to have words put in my mouth. What I want to say is this. All of the religions are partially right, and they can't all be completely right because they all disagree. Okay? Now that's a very scientific viewpoint. All of the religions talking about the other side and afterlife and all of that are partially right. What happens over time is if someone comes back and says, well, okay, I went over and I saw the light, and the light was like this. It was as if he was dressed in white robes. Well, then they'll write that down, and pretty soon it becomes he was dressed in white robes, and he was a he. And all the experiencer was saying was it was as if this being of light, if he was a he, was dressed in white robes. He was in this beautiful white light. But it'll become interpreted by those on this side who have not gone there and done that he was dressed in white robes. And that's how you get all this, these religious beliefs that are, this is how it must be. And we have thousands of different religious viewpoints in the world, all of them thinking that they're absolutely right. And they can't all be absolutely right from the scientific viewpoint. So I'm not trying to generalize, and I'm not trying to say they're wrong. What I'm trying to say is we need to look at all of the religions and see where they agree. One of my chapters in the book I wrote is showing that, how all of the religions come from the same root and how they all have got added on, and I would call them speculations of people not just trying to explain it to somebody else. One time I was listening to a guy and he said, well, we all signed contracts before we came here. Well, I didn't see any contracts on the other side. That's a great way to explain it, that we came here with a life plan that we're trying to carry out. And that's what he's really trying to say with the contracts. But I don't think there's signed and written contracts that are filed in God's file drawer somewhere. Okay, that's a whole lot of speculation that has become doctrine to some people. And they think, well, that's how it must be. Well, no, that's how someone tried to explain it, and someone else tried to explain what the first person had tried to explain. And if you've ever gone to a party where four people are whispering in each other's ear, you whisper in one guy's ear, and the fourth person doesn't have the same message at the end. And that's what happens over generations with scriptures and doctrines and religions. They get to where they're saying, well, it's got to be baptism by immersion. And the other one's, no, it doesn't have to be baptism by immersion. It's okay if it's baptism is done by sprinkling. And this is a big argument over nothing. Okay?
I don't know. Well, yeah, maybe.
They're not all wrong. They're right on the central core, and then they all differ a whole lot on all the unimportant stuff.
Maybe, but I think a lot of people, including myself, would be very uncomfortable when we apply the word science to what you're just talking about. I mean, that's just your interpretation of what's happening. So I think we're all struggling with how we
Science is not a written code somewhere that this is the way the world is. Science is a method of finding out the truth, and you do that by collating all the facts. And so what I was just doing with religion is very much science. It's trying to take all the facts and make them all fit together. That's what science is. You have to take in the stuff that agrees and the stuff that disagrees and try to come up with a new paradigm, a new view of how all that could fit together, and that becomes your new hypothesis until you get a new fact. And when you get a new fact, you have to squeeze that one into the existing hypothesis. And what's happening in the materialist world is they're refusing to look at the data of all the metaphysical parts of the world. And physics is our study of 3D plus time, and metaphysics is everything outside, and we can go back to the starts and talk about that. But that's what metaphysics is everything outside of physics. And our worldview must contain both physics and metaphysics. And our worldview has to be complete. We can't say, one of the professors at Caltech was saying that he can't find any place for consciousness to exist when inside the standard model. And that's so ridiculous because the starts put consciousness outside the standard model. And yet he was actually saying that and quoting that as a truth. And you can't find consciousness within the standard model. And quantum physics, quantum electrodynamics requires consciousness to exist outside of the paradigm of physics so that the observer can observe the wave function and have the state collapse. You can't have it collapse into reality unless it's observed by a consciousness. And that's what we're doing with the double slit experiment, trying to show that consciousness causes matter to exist. Once you see that, then the consciousness must exist outside of the matter. Once the consciousness must exist outside of the matter, there's nothing left. And so everyone who's not incorporating the implications of quantum electrodynamics is missing that boat. I wanted to quote something here by at the end of that article that just came out yesterday in the Atlantic by Gideon Lickfield, at the end he's quoting Susan Blackmore. Okay, Susan Blackmore, the art skeptic, feels similarly. She concluded in her email to me by scolding those who persist in the false and unhelpful black and white comparison between NDEs as true, wonderful, spiritual versus NDEs as just a hallucination of no importance. And the truth is, it seems to me, that's Susan Blackmore, the truth is, it seems to me, that NDEs can be wonderful, life-changing experiences that shed light on the human condition and on the questions of life and death. So, are we making a shift? I think we're making a shift. We're making a shift in August of last year. Michael Shermer, who writes Skeptic magazine and who is the skeptic for Scientific American, he had quite an experience at his wedding, and he described it in the August issue. It was absolutely unworldly. And it was an anomaly he doesn't know what to do with.
I just interviewed Dr. Michael Shermer a few weeks ago. There is absolutely no change in his position. And when I interviewed him, what I talked to him about was his 2003 article on near-death experience researcher Dr. Pin von Lommel, where he completely distorted the conclusions of von Lommel's work in order to support his pet theory that it could all just be explained by brain stuff. So, Shermer hasn't moved at all. And I think if you carefully... He has, and I just talked to him, and I think if you talk... So he published this thing about this is what these guys do. And it's the classic co-opt strategy. It's the oh yeah, I've had an extraordinary experience, and don't worry, guys, we'll get around to explaining that inside our model, and then it won't be supernatural, it won't be paranormal, it'll be normal. I've interviewed Blackmore as well. I interviewed her 5 years ago, and she said she doesn't have a clue on near-death experience research because she doesn't stay current on it. But she still throws out these little things. And I think if you really parsed what she's saying, and if you really pushed her on it, she would say the same thing as Shermer. She'd say all this nice stuff to placate the people who've had a near-death experience, and then she'd say, but don't worry, we're going to explain away what's really going on in your brain.
I like what Dean Radin says. He says, that's their job. They're not going to do anything that's going to threaten their job. But they're moving.
Maybe.
The shift is happening.
Maybe. We'll see. And maybe you guys will lead the charge over there at IANDS. I sure hope so. I just wish we'd be a little bit more on point with our near-death experience science and really directing where that goes, because I think we jump around and say, oh, near-death experience science will lead the charge, and we go, oh, no, over here, Dean Radin and IANDS will do it. Oh, over here, Mario Beauregard and his ideas will. I mean, near-death experience, we need to have a clear path forward in terms of where that science is going. And if we leave it in the hands of the likes of Dr. Sam Parnia, it's going to be co-opted, and we're going to be on that treadmill going nowhere for the next 20 years. That's my prediction.
Well, I think that my prediction, Alex, is sort of the opposite of yours. We're actually moving. 70% of people, 72% I think it is, believe there's an afterlife. And they have reasons to believe that. And the work I do now in mediumship, and that's been my subject for the last 9 years. I've been studying mediumship very heavily. And I bring spirit through all the time with absolute evidence. I can't figure out where it's coming from. Of course, the materials will say I picked it up from some kind of decoherence in an Akashic record, a holographic universe. I picked it up from off the surface of things. It's been decoherent onto the surface, and I'm just picking up these vibrations. Of course, they don't believe in ESP either, but they'll say that what I'm doing when I bring through somebody's departed grandmother from 1894, and I have her name, and I know what she looked like, and they bring me a picture, and I've even got her nickname and everything else, her name and her nickname. And I bring that through because I've learned how to do this, and I spent thousands of dollars traveling the world to learn how to do this for 10 years. When I bring that through, and the Noetic Society's testing me and everything else to see how that's done, they'll turn around and say, well, you're reading their minds with ESP. And then the next week they'll turn around and say, yeah, but ESP doesn't work either. So how do I get that information? How do I stand there in front of the congregation and pull in somebody's grandma from 1894, tell you what her hair looks like, what her name is, what her nickname is, what she died of, and then bring a message through to the sitter that's sitting there, and I say, your grandma says, I love you, though I never knew you. And then the person confirms that grandma died before she was born. And these kind of things, how do I do that? I'm amazed myself at how I do it. It comes, usually when that's coming into my head, my thought process is, Alan, where are you getting this? That's so from left field. Of course, it's coming from somebody else. It's coming from spirit. That's what our 2012 study at Athletic Society shows, that mediums are receiving something through their feelings, their ears, or their eyes. That's what science is. They're going to have to come along with us one of these days, because each of those materialists is where they're putting their head in the sand like an ostrich, or they're putting the blinders, or they're just saying, I'm not going to look at the data that you people are developing. I won't do it.
Right.
That's the problem. But 72% of people do believe in this stuff because they've had personal experiences. And I get more and more of them all the time. And I am religiously trying to keep the science clear and view the science. And that's why I work at all this as hard as I do to make the science stand up.
You're definitely to be commended for that, and you are, knee deep in deeper than that in the science in your work with both IANDS and the Institute for both IANDS and
IANDS. They're both IANDS and IANDS, yeah.
IANDS and IANDS. That's right.
Science.
I guess that's why.
Science.
Yeah, IANDS and the Institute. So, Alan, it's been great having you on. Tell folks again real quickly about the conference coming up. They'll be able to register when this show is published, and they should check it out at the IANDS website, which is IANDS.org. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's in San Antonio. We'll have, on the Thursday, we have 18 different scientists talking about different parts of things. And then on the weekend, we have over 42 different people speaking. We had 90 people applying to speak, and so we have to weed that down to 42, and that's very difficult because you have to say some can't speak. And Bruce Grayson, Dr. Bruce Grayson will be there as one of the keynote speakers. We separated it out so that we're trying to make it so that you can come for part of the weekend, and those who want to see the science, all the nurses and doctors who want their CPE credits can come on the Thursday and get to all the science and get their credits for it. And then the people who are more interested in more general or metaphysical things, that those sorts of speakers will be on the weekend, so that it's available to most people. Most people are not so interested in the science. In fact, they fall asleep when I start talking, that sort of thing. And so we do that and we separated it so it's easier to do for people this year. So it's going to be a lot more fun than normal.
Great.
And it's on Riverwalk in San Antonio, Texas. It's a great place to visit. We're at the Marriott on Riverwalk.
Wow, that will be a great experience for folks. So, again, we'll have a link in the show notes for folks to check that out. It does sound like a great event, and we sure encourage everyone to get out there who's interested in check it out, especially from the Texas area. And also check out Alan's excellent website. A ton of info on there. Afterlife.pro is his URL for that. It's been great having you on. Again, our guest has been Dr. Alan Hugenot, and thanks so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks again to Dr. Alan Hugenot for joining me today on Skeptiko. One question to tee up from this interview, and that is, do you think that near-death experience research runs the risk of being co-opted by mainstream medical research? And when I say that, I think the risk is that we'll see a backpedaling and soft selling of the big picture implication of near-death experience. That is, that mind doesn't equal brain, and that neuroscience as we know it is a failed proposition, and that the medical model of brain death is a failed proposition. I think all that has to go out the window, and what I see the potential for is researchers willing to back off of that and pursue these subtle peculiarities of this phenomena that sure seems important to people and sure seems like it makes a big difference in their life, and all that other crap that you hear from science as we know it types that are trying to find a convenient way to sweep this phenomena under the rug. So I've kind of shown my hand there and where I think this is going, but I still want to throw the question out there and generate a dialogue with you, my valued and wonderfully intelligent Skeptiko listeners. Of course, the place to engage in this conversation with me is through the Skeptiko website at skeptiko.com. You can bounce on over the forum, quickly join us, and talk with folks over there. You can leave a message right on the website, or Facebook me, or email me directly. I have a number of interesting shows coming up, including an interview with Dr. Evan Thompson that directly follows up on this idea of near-death experience science and where some of the mainstream folks are trying to take it. That's coming up in a few weeks. I have a number of other interesting shows, either recorded or being recorded as well. I do hope you stay with me for all of that. Until next time, do take care. Bye for now.